begin with to illustrate the masks that we hide behind. And I was having all these doubts, one doubt after another with which story to start with. And so I was looking for inspiration, and I figured what better place to look for inspiration than Chinese food and fortune cookies. So I ordered Chinese a couple of weeks ago, and I excitedly opened up the fortune cookie. And I opened it up, and it was really amazing because the fortune said, any doubts you may have will disappear immediately. But then my immediate thought was, I doubt that. So much for that inspiration actually working. But as I was thinking about this, one story really did come to mind that I think illustrates how we tend to hide behind masks and maybe the cost of that and what that looks like. So I'm going to take you back a couple of years ago. It was Christmas time, and I had gotten one of those auto starters for my car. And I was really excited about that, felt really good about that. And so I decided to get it installed at the local Best Buy. So I go to Best Buy, and it's one of these things that tell you it can take 4 hours. Of course, it takes 8 hours, and so I'm waiting, I'm getting impatient. And I go to pick it up, and the employee there says, well, it works, but, which is never a good thing. You never want to hear that. And he says, well, because you have a manual transmission, we had to do something, it didn't quite work. So you have to make sure that you always leave it in neutral, or it could roll on you. And I said, no worries, no problem. It's going to be fine. I always leave it in neutral. I'm always aware. I'm always mindful of that, And so I said, no problem. So, it works well for a couple of months. Everything's going great. Well, then it's one of those cold winter days, that we love here in Illinois. And I've got my car in my driveway, and I decide in the morning, for whatever reason, I'm going to move it into the street. So I move it into the street, put the brake on, and I leave it in neutral. Or so I thought. So I go back in the house, I'm finishing, getting my breakfast ready, I hit the auto starter. About 5-10 minutes later, I walk out, and I'm walking down the driveway, and my car is no longer on the side of the street. And I'm thinking, you've got to be kidding me, right? Somebody stole it, I'm going to reach for my phone to call the police. And then out of the corner of my eye, I see this red object. And I turn my head, and 5 houses down, I see my car still running on the front lawn of my neighbor's house. So I see that, and you can imagine what I'm thinking. How can this happen? And I'm walking over there, and then there's another neighbor, a poor neighbor, who's walking up to the car, looking in there, and you can see her shock when there's no one in the car. And I didn't know what to say to her. I was watching Knight Rider yesterday and kind of was trying to figure out the kid thing. And it was just, all these thoughts, like what could have happened, what could have gone wrong. And so I get in the car, and she pushes me out of the lawn, and then I drive to work. And what really stood out to me, though, is for me, one of the masks I'm going to talk about today is this mask of being put together like things don't bother you. And that's something that at times, I really kind of cling to. But what's so interesting, I'll always remember this. When I went to work that day, I remember a staff person saying to me, you looked like a ghost. And it was so powerful to me because what I realized is because of the intensity of that experience, of that event, I couldn't hide behind that mask that day. I couldn't hide behind the, I've got it all together. But ironically enough, there was something freeing in that. So what I want to spend a little bit of time talking about is that mask and a couple of other masks that I think we all hide behind. But then we're also going to think a little bit about what's the cost? At what cost do we hide behind those masks? And are there alternatives? So as I said, one mask that I think we hide behind a lot is this mask of having it all together, right? And what does that look like? That's the person who's really calm, cool, collected. Nothing seems to bother them, right? There can be all sorts of things going on, and they're cool with that. They're fine with that. They can kind of just go with the flow. And then on the other hand, I think we have the mask of the timid. And the mask of the timid is the person who's really quiet, right? They say things like, I prefer to listen. They don't share their ideas a lot. They also kind of can just go with the flow. They're pleasant to be around, but again, they're not taking the initiative. And then I think there's another mask that maybe is just the opposite of the mask of the timid. And that's the mask of the overconfident. Right? The overconfident, they don't go with the flow, they go against the flow. Right? They get loud, they're always sharing their ideas, they're always kind of saying, I know what's best. And then there's one more mask, and I think it can be the mask of the hopeless. right? And this is the person is, not only are they not going with the flow, they make it their mission to stop the flow, right? And they're kind of hiding behind this idea of like, there just isn't any hope. Nothing that we do is going to be good. It's not going to go well. But I think if it's really interesting, if we really stop and think and look at these masks, we see that they all kind of serve the same function. And I think the function is to not be found out. You see, I think we're so afraid that we're going to be found to be imposters. And so we hide behind these masks because we're afraid of putting ourselves out there, afraid of getting hurt. And so if we go back and look at the mask of the put together, what's behind that? It's, oh my gosh, I can't do this, but I can't let anyone see that. They have all these doubts. Or the mask of the timid, I think it's, I have these great ideas, but you know what? They're going to reject those ideas, so I don't share them. And the mask of the overconfident is, I get loud, I get really loud, but I don't talk about what's most meaningful and what's the most important. I don't share those things. And the mask of the hopeless is, well, you know what? I actually do have ideas and I do hope, but I'm not going to share those things because I don't want to get hurt again. And so what do? We hide behind these masks. We protect ourselves. But we have to think this question, at what cost? What is the cost? Well, I think the first cost is something really interesting. You see, we're afraid of exposing ourselves, and yet we so desire to be known. So how can we truly be known if we're not allowing ourselves, not putting ourselves out there? And at times we don't even then know ourselves and know what's most meaningful to us. And a second cost that I think is especially meaningful as we're sitting here today and thinking about our organization, our agency, is it's a cost to ourselves and a cost to everyone here because we're not sharing our ideas. We're not sharing ideas for making this place so wonderful and amazing. Because I really think that all of us here have special abilities, special talents, special creativities. And we have thoughts and ideas at times about how do I implement those? But then we don't because of this fear. And so we hide behind the masks. So we're hurting the people in this room and the people that we serve and support because we have these amazing abilities, but we're not putting ourselves out there. So what's the alternative? Well, I think the alternative is this willingness to be vulnerable. And what's so interesting is when we look at the root of vulnerability, it means able to be wounded. Able to be wounded. And that's scary, right? That's risky, and we've been wounded. We have this pain. And so we step back. And yet if we think about it, taking that risk can be so freeing. Now, when I'm saying vulnerability, I'm not kind of saying we're going to be a Debbie Downer and just going around sharing all of our feelings and dreads and doubts with people. No, I don't think it's that. I think with vulnerability, there's a vitality. I think with vulnerability, there's a risk. And I think that risk is doing what we know is in the best service, the best interest of our clients. It's living our values. It's taking that risk and saying, you know what? I have an idea. I'm behind the mask of the timid. I have an idea. And I'm willing to put myself out there because I know that this is going to help the people we serve and support. Or if it's this mask of put together, it might be a time just saying, you know what? I'm not sure. Taking that risk and saying, I'm not sure. Are you willing to help me out? Or if it's the mask of the overconfident, it's willing to share what it is that's most meaningful to us. And if you have the mask of the hopeless, it's the willingness to share some hope. See, I think that's what true vulnerability really is. And I think there's a gift in that, and there's a risk in that, but there's a reward in that. So let me take you back to that day where I drove into my neighbor's lawn, where my car did. What was really interesting when I was driving home, I was going back and forth between do I tell the neighbor? How do you go about knocking somebody's door? I didn't even know them and say, my car accidentally drove into your front lawn without being fearful that you're going to be taken away. But I decided it was something that I needed to do. And it was tough, and it did require some degree of vulnerability. But it was such an amazing and freeing experience. I don't remember exactly what the neighbor said, but I just remember it felt so good to be able to be honest and genuine, that I didn't have to hide behind that mask. I just want to leave you with some lyrics from a song I really like. It's by 10th Avenue North. And it goes something like this. So you thought you had to keep this up. All the work that you do, but it just wasn't enough. And you can't believe it's not enough. All the walls you built up are glass on the outside. So let them fall down. There's healing that comes from the sound of the walls crashing to the ground. We're here now, and this is where the healing begins.